Now it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Brian Hannon. Brian Hannon is Vice President of Sales at Leverage Point. Previously, he served as Director of Sales at Leverage Point, Senior Account Executive at Invention Machine Corporation, and Senior Account Manager at Mentor Graphics. He heads Leverage Point's value selling initiative by leading the sales team to capture, communicate, and deliver value in every customer interaction. So with that, Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Taylor. And thank you to everyone joining us today. So we're going to start by talking about one of the main challenges that sales executives have. And there's certainly a lot of challenges, but especially in the beginning of the year, or in this case, maybe mid-year, many sales executives analyze their pipeline in the hopes that what it says is accurate. And I've been selling for, I think, over 25 years, and I've been through many, many pipeline reviews. And they're always challenging because as a sales manager or a sales leader, you spend all of your time trying to analyze each deal by asking questions to the sales rep. Is this real? Is this going to happen? Are you talking to the right people? And what happens, and it's a natural occurrence, is that sales reps get excited. They have a meeting or two with a new prospect, and they end up putting a deal in the pipeline that may or may not be qualified. And ultimately what happens is you have a large pipeline that you don't have a lot of confidence in. And I think anyone who's been in sales has experienced this before. What the numbers show, in fact, and I was actually a little bit surprised about this when I initially saw this, is that almost 60% of the deals that go into the pipeline never materialize. Now that doesn't mean that you've lost them to the competition. That means that those deals just don't happen to anyone. The prospect that you're speaking to, or maybe even an existing client, decides not to do anything. They decide that the opportunity that you've discussed with them isn't important enough. It hasn't elevated high enough on their radar for them to take action. And as we all know, everyone has a busy day and everyone has many priorities and to-dos on their list. And the way our prospects and clients judge our opportunity is how clear it is in their mind that this is something they should act on. And as we can see here with these numbers, 60% of the ones that the sales reps put into the funnel thinking that they're real actually aren't. So why do they do this? And that's a great question. And there's probably a lot of different answers to the question why. But there's some underlying reasons why a sales rep thinks something is real when it actually isn't. And one of the great surveys that I saw when I joined about 3.5 years ago, and it really resonated with me, having sold for a number of years and really spent the majority of my time as a sales rep trying to convince my boss that what I had on the table or what I had put into Salesforce was actually going to happen. But if you look at this survey, and I'll describe it in my viewpoint, this is a survey to executives, buying executives, and it's really asking them, how did your meetings go with sales reps on average? What they're saying in this survey is that, well, first, they don't give high marks to sales reps in general, but that's to be expected, I think. But they give the highest marks to sales reps in terms of the knowledge about their own products. So a sales rep tends to be the best at talking about both their company and their product, the features, the benefits, all of the speeds and feeds and the new technology and the innovations of their product. And all of that is certainly important. Where the executives get disappointed, and ultimately I think where the meetings go south, is that the areas they're most interested in, and this is, I think, broken down into these bottom two categories, where can the sales reps offering help them in their business, and how are other companies in their industry experiencing the business, what challenges are they experiencing, and how has this particular sales rep helped other companies solving those challenges? These are the areas that sales reps get the weakest grades. And I know you're all probably thinking the same. These tend to be the areas that people want to hear about the most. And in fact, what we see from a lot of sales methodologies is this really, it backs it up. And in fact, it's fairly obvious if you've gone through sales training recently. If you look at one of the quotes here from Challenger Sales, Challenger takes those two categories that I just mentioned, and I think this is a fair statement, views those as what they call insights. Those are topics and areas that a salesperson can educate a buyer, an executive, about what's happening in the industry that they didn't already know. So they're bringing information to the table and teaching an executive something they didn't know, and hopefully at the same time, they're teaching the executive how they can solve that problem. We view this in a very similar way, but we take the lens or the concept of value more directly. We think about it in a way that says, can a sales rep move beyond just talking about the features and the benefits of their product, and specifically talk about the economic impact that that product can have on the prospect or the client that they're speaking with? This can be done in lots of different ways, but one of the major lessons that I've learned since being at Leverage Point is that the great majority of companies, B2B companies, large companies that you all know and you hear their names every day, don't do this very well. And this is an area that we try to focus and help people on. One of the reasons this is so important is another Forrester quote here that tells us the first vendor or the first sales rep to begin communicating value or the first one to do it in the sales cycle tends to win the business 3 times out of 4, much more often than not. That's a pretty critical metric if you look at it, and it really drives one of the reasons that many of our clients are so focused in this area. But really, it all comes down to priorities, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier. If a prospect or a client leaves a meeting with a clear understanding of your offering, but more importantly, why your offering can solve one of their main problems, and what the economic impact of that can be, then at the end of that meeting, a sales rep can ask a very simple question. I've explained to you what we think we can offer based on what we know, and I've explained to you the type of economic impact that we've had on other clients in a similar situation. Is that something that's important enough for you to focus on, to consider, and would that rise to the level of an initiative or a project that you would be willing to push forward? Now, that's the type of question that sometimes scares the salesperson altogether, but the answer to that may be yes and it may be no. But if it's a yes, the deal is qualified and they can put it into the funnel and feel confident that the majority of those deals will continue to move forward. If it's a no, then they've qualified the deal out and they won't be wasting their time. The challenge we have is getting salespeople to this point in the conversation, getting them to the point where they've clarified impact and they can ask this question. Because as we discussed many times, a meeting will go on, a salesperson will talk about product, talk about the technology, and the executive will nod and smile and maybe ask a few polite questions. The meeting ends, the salesperson leaves very happy, and they forecast the deal. The executive leaves and says, I'm probably never going to talk to this salesperson again. And that's the disconnect here that I think that we're running into. So let's talk about how existing marketing groups can impact that, or how they try to. You know, if we look at what they're spending, what B2B companies spend on marketing tools, it's astronomical number, hundreds of billions, maybe over $1 trillion. I haven't done the specific math here. But if you take that content or that set of tools that marketing is developing, there is a portion of that that is very focused on value. And the question is that not getting into the hands of salespeople, or is that impacting what they're doing? Well, as I said earlier, many salespeople aren't actually getting deep into the value conversations, or I would say the great majority are not doing that. And so why is that the case? So this small group, or this small set of content, marketing content, that we love here at Leverage Point are case studies, and everyone's familiar with what a case study is. But if you think about case studies, they tend to be very well researched. Many times companies will hire outside firms to do interviews with their clients and gather data, and they spend pretty good money on these case studies. What happens is they get written up, and you have now a very slick 1 to 2 page document. And where does that go? Let's think about that for a second. The document ends up in one of 2 places specifically. The first place is on the website. So case studies, if you go to most B2B websites today, you look into the section that says case studies, you'll find a list of case studies that have been developed over the years. But I kind of view this as the back room. If people are searching for that content, they typically will find it. But that's not a great strategy, hoping that your prospects are going and combing through your website, looking in the back rooms for your case studies, and then convincing themselves to buy your product. But the second area is really where I want to focus, because this is where the salespeople have the opportunity to make an impact. And the second area tends to be email. Because a case study is in text form, you don't see many salespeople presenting these directly to prospects. What they'll do is they'll use case studies, to get a meeting in the first place by emailing these out, or they'll use a case study after a meeting based on what they heard to hopefully get that next meeting and move along. But as we know, hope is not a great strategy, because email today is very, very difficult to drive your selling process through. It's great to generate interest, and it's great to bring people to your website and hopefully engage them. But once you've met with an executive, emailing them a case study after the fact is limited success. The chances of them even opening up the email and ultimately opening up the PDF document and reading it are pretty small. And as we can see here, some of the numbers and click-through rates are tiny. This is not a strategy I would really want to rely on. So our idea is this: if you can take the content from those case studies, which is, as we mentioned, well-researched and expensive content, in my opinion, and you can turn it into something that salespeople could use actively as they're having conversations with executives, your rate of engagement from that content, from those ideas and those numbers that you've spent a lot of money gathering, the results will go much higher. So what Leverage Point focuses on is providing a tool for salespeople that allows them to present a case study in its either very generic form or specific to another company in the industry. Tell the story about how problems in that specific company have been solved, show some numbers, and then begin to morph that case study into something that's more specific to the prospect or client. And we can call this morphing a case study into a value proposition, or even morphing a case study into a business case. You're taking something that is generic, or you're taking something that relates to someone else, and through a conversation, you're changing it so now it relates to the prospect that you're speaking with. This can be done, by the way, in a meeting, or this can be done over several meetings. but the goal is to get agreement, and as you'll see in a moment, an example will show you, the goal is to get agreement that the thought process behind the problems that are there and the solutions that are available is strong, and the numbers are compelling enough to make this particular opportunity that the salesperson is working on compelling enough for this executive or the buyer to move forward in the sales cycle. What we see in terms of actual results from our clients are some of the numbers that you see here. An impactful value proposition that may start as a case study will drive a sale forward faster. You get higher velocity. You're going to get higher closure rates because an effective value proposition can help you compare directly to a competitor. And you're leaving information in the hands of the buyer about specifically why they should choose you over the competitor and the economic difference of choosing you versus the competitor. In many cases, this is a lower price competitor. But what we're also seeing is ultimately higher prices at closing. When a salesperson has a strong business case that they're heading into the end of a sales cycle with, they're much more willing and actually typically compelled to hold the line on price, meaning they'll push back on discount requests. And in many cases, as salespeople, we know when you're talking to a buyer, they have their immediate discount request. And based on how you react to that, they'll go further or they'll go in a different direction. And having a strong business case helps the salesperson push back on those discount requests. And these are the types of results that we see. So lots of times we get the question, do we have a case study that we can leverage? And the answer is almost always yes. At a minimum, it's a starting point. But if we look at some of the key elements of typical case studies, we can see where leverage point, when we look at a case study, what we look for. So obviously scenario analysis, what's happening within this particular situation, within the company or the industry that the case study is focused on. A discussion of the key benefits and the cause and effect of those benefits. So what are those benefits driving? What are what are the actions, or what are the results that those benefits are driving? And then somewhat related are KPIs. What are the business drivers for the particular company? And if they're quantified, that's even better. What's the risk of doing nothing at all? As we saw earlier, the funnel where 60% of the opportunities go away with no decision. What is the impact of a no decision? And is that something that you can begin communicating to a prospect early? And then finally, alignment with the company's strategic goals. And this gets back to insights. It gets back to what other companies in the industry are trying to do, where they're headed, and how your particular offering helps them get there faster. So what I'll do now is show you an example of one of our digital value propositions and walk you through it. So this is our website. As you may know, although you may not, we're a cloud software company. And so our clients log in via our main page here, and they each have their own completely secure area. So when they log in, they're brought to their company's particular area. And as a salesperson, I'm brought to the sales side of the application. In fact, as you'll see up here, there's a marketing side. You can think of this as where you might generate content. And a sales side. This is where your sales team would log in and they would access available, blessed value propositions. So we're going to grab the first one here, which says webinar, surprisingly enough. So our fictitious example here is a company called Traycom. They're a software company as well, and they make trading compliance software. So they sell to brokerage houses, and they're really trying to automate some of the manual processes that the brokerage houses have today in order to hopefully save them money. But they're going to need to make an investment in the software to do that. So as the salesperson for Traycom, my challenge is to convince companies that the upfront investment in software, or maybe over time, is going to pay for itself and more, and is going to elevate to the point where my buyer is willing to push this forward and maybe introduce me to senior executives, or simply get me the next meeting and keep this sales process moving along. So you'll notice on the bottom here, you have a series of tabs. You can almost think of these as slides, but the difference between PowerPoint and these slides are intelligent. Each slide can be and is linked to essentially an engine, a calculation engine underneath. And as you'll see in a moment, as I tell the story about my offering, I can begin to incorporate feedback from the prospect into my story. So we see here this first screen says insights, and these are some of the things that I want to cover with my prospect. I want to start talking to them about some of the industry data that we see. Now, the example we're showing you here is a general type case study, which means it's an average of data across a number of clients. But I could easily have on this first page the name of one of my clients who's agreed to give us a case study, and I could be showing their data directly. It's really up to you and how you think it will be most successful. If we go to the next screen here, we're now identifying the 4 key business drivers. And we can see here, the employee retention is important, efficiencies around administration and management, saving money there, and then compliance risk reduction. And as we all know, in some industries, risk reduction is a big deal, and it can sometimes be hard to quantify. So what you'll see here are a series of tabs, 2 at a time, that actually tackle each one of these business drivers. Now, for time's sake, I'm not going to go through each one in detail, but we'll show some examples of what they might look like. And we'll start at the beginning with employee retention. So we're now starting to talk about some generalities around employee retention in the industry, and we're going to start showing some numbers. So for our example here, our average company size has 10,000 employees, and the average turnover is 10%, and the average cost to replace an employee is $25,000. And what we see here in a situation like that, on the bottom right, we see a $1.25 million annual savings if they were to adapt our technology, again, based on what we've seen from other clients. Now, the company I'm talking to might tell me that they actually have 12,000 employees. Let me undo the highlighting. And their turnover is more like 12%. And they're okay with the $25,000 replacement cost for an employee, although they're going to have to go back and check that number, but we'll move forward with that. So what you see here on the bottom, we start to see that the impact of my offering is changing based on the feedback from the prospect. If we go into risk management, we start to look at the impact that the software can have on errors. And risk is very big in some industries. In fact, you can see here the trading compliance risk, if there are problems, can be a big deal. But my prospect is very conservative. And when I come at them with this 50% reduction in compliance event risks, they're not going for that. So they want to reduce this to 10%, which is fine. As long as they agree with our logic, we can continue to talk about and provide proof that maybe this should be higher, but let's agree with it for now. We now have administration efficiency, and we can talk through our thinking there. We could begin changing some numbers about cost per trade. We have management efficiency, how much time it takes for management to evaluate each trade, and what an automated software solution would save on that time and what that impact would be. And again, I can start looking at some of the inputs there and making those changes based on the conversation. So then finally, what I get now is a proposed impact that I can have on the prospect that I'm speaking to. So based on what we've talked about, we think separate from the cost of the software, because we're not getting into price yet, we think we can impact this particular company by almost $3.3 million per year. Now, this is my point where I can ask my prospect, is that number impressive? Is that number something that you're willing to move this deal forward with? Because if you have projects on your plate that can save the company 10, 15, $20 million, 3.3 is not that compelling. And maybe I'll learn immediately that, yeah, maybe we'll try this next year. Maybe we won't have these major projects on our plate. We'll have more time to spend on it. That's great. I've qualified the deal. I have an opportunity to come back in next year, and I've left this number in my prospect's head. But maybe the 3.3 million per year over a period of 5 years is something that they want to continue talking about. It's intriguing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this example, and maybe I'm talking with Chase Bank. So what I've just done is now I've created a unique version of this now maybe case study. So we've transformed it from a general, we'll transform it from a general case study into a value proposition, because now we're basically saying these numbers are much closer to what Chase sees than our general case study that we showed earlier. Let me show you a couple more things. We've saved it as Chase. We've added a unique capability we call views. And one of the questions that we would get when I joined the company early on is that, depending on where you are in the sales cycle, there's different information that you might want to share. I may not want to begin talking about price in my first meeting. I really want to focus on value, and that's fine. Or maybe the salesperson is tasked with opening up the opportunity. Once they've identified and qualified an opportunity, they get their pre-sales engineer involved. So if we click on views, we can see this same value proposition, but now in a different view. So what I'm doing now is I've opened it up into, in this case, a pre-sales view. And you have control over what these are and what they look like, certainly. What we see here is some similar screens that we saw earlier. And by the way, you'll notice that these are the numbers that we captured. So I've now handed off my early value proposition to my pre-sales engineer and said, let's dig in deeper. Let's get more specific. So they have the opportunity to start to drill into the numbers. Maybe we've actually proven and convinced our buyer, and hopefully they're our champion right now, that a 25% reduction is reasonable to expect. So we're going to make a change to that. So now my summary has gone up a little bit, but let's start to talk about price. Based on the number of employees and some other information, we can look at the cost of our software, which at this point is a little over $1 million on an annual basis. But we've also started to establish the cost of not doing anything. And this is very, very important in many cases. This is the avoidance of the no decision. Are you willing to walk away from a potential loss of $3.5 million by not investing $1 million this year? That's the conversation we actually want to have. We may also show this over a multi-year period. So instead of over a year, we've decided that this would be a 5-year contract, and the buyer has the opportunity to save his or her company almost $18 million over that 5-year period by investing a little over $5 million. That is an opportunity that a CFO would be willing to discuss if there was evidence and if there was a strong business case to back it up. What I can also potentially do, if I want, is start to look at specifics around pricing. How do we price our software? Do we do it seat-based, or maybe we price it transaction? And based on the choice, the numbers may begin to change, but that's okay. And so finally, I've now maybe gone to the point where we're willing to present to the CFO. My buyer, my internal champion, is excited, thinks this is an opportunity that will make them look good and will also help the company and save a lot of money. So what I can do here, I'll save this again, and then I'm going to export this to a PowerPoint. So we help you, meaning Leverage Point, will help you create a PowerPoint that has essentially your PowerPoint template. It's your look and feel, but we help you tell the value story within that. So this is Tracom, again, our fictitious company. But now we begin to develop the Chase Bank business case. And we're able to hand this to our champion and either allow them to present this internally, or we'll both present it together. But it goes from now this digital form into a more traditional PowerPoint that they're comfortable emailing or they're comfortable presenting themselves. So with that, I will wrap this up, but this is just one example. You'll see the graphics here, you see the information in the particular value proposition. This is unique for all of our prospects and all of our clients, and we help you create that. But it all starts with a case study. And what I'll leave you with here before our Q&A is an offer. So what we're willing to do, if you're interested, is if you email us one of your case studies and find a good one, find one with some numbers in it that you feel represents your current business as much as possible. But email us the case study. We'll take all of them, and we promise Taylor will stay up late and read through them all. And we'll choose the best 3, and we'll develop a value proposition for them and give you access to that. So you'll be able to see firsthand what your company's value proposition might look like. So we encourage you to send that in. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to Taylor.
Great, thanks, Brian. And we've had a few questions come in during the webinar, but you still have time if you'd like to ask Brian another question. Just enter it into the panel on the right side of your screen. While you're entering, a reminder to complete the 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of Designing Value Propositions for Sales Conversations and be entered into a raffle giving away 1 free copy of the Challenge of Value. All right, so let's begin Q&A. First, to answer the standard and most popular question myself, yes, the webinar is recorded and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. All right, Brian, here's your first question. At what point in the sales cycle are these value propositions used?
And so the answer to that is how you design them. And again, this is something that we've learned, I think, over the past few years. At certain stages of the sales cycle, you want to either avoid too much detail or start to introduce detail. And I think the amount of detail depends on who you're speaking with. Are you speaking with a financial person who is going to drill you on the numbers and they want to see the math? Or are you speaking with someone who's really just interested in the bigger picture? And if the bigger picture is compelling, then they'll move you forward. So the answer would be, depending on the design, or if you recall the view, it should be early in the sales cycle with a more qualitative approach. And then that should morph into a more quantitative view as you get deeper into the sales cycle.
Great, thanks. And we talked a lot about salespeople today, but who else besides salespeople do you see using value propositions?
Yeah, so we see all types of marketing and salespeople using value propositions. The simple answer is that this is a story about how your offering impacts your clients. So if you think about who cares about that story, there's a long list. If you're talking internally, if you're a product manager, you want to be able to tell that story to your boss, to senior management, to your board. If you're a marketing person, you want to be able to tell that story at product launch to your sales force. If you're a salesperson, you want to be able to tell that story to your prospects to get them interested. And if you're a technical salesperson, you want to be able to tell the story to help close the business, to compel your prospects that this is something that they should be doing and they should be doing it now. So everyone has a need to tell the story. This type of tool helps you tell that story better.
Great, thanks. And next question, what if the case studies that our marketing group currently has aren't quantified at all? Can we still get started?
Yes. So I would say the great majority of case studies have a starting point. One of the lessons that we learned early on, we would get feedback that, hey, this is great, this is something that we should be doing, we've talked about it, but we don't have the data. Let's get the data and we'll get back to you in a year. And guess what? No one gets back in a year, they move on to other things. Using a case study as a starting point to highlight the specific data that you may need is a way to get that ball moving, to get the process going. And so I would say almost all case studies, if some time has been put into them, can be put into a tool like this, and then you iterate. You make it better, you gather data from your colleagues, you gather data from your clients, and the case study or the value proposition improves over time.
Great. And it looks like we've got a shy audience today, so this is the last question for you. What are your experiences with adoption by salespeople?
Yeah, so that's the hardest question. Salespeople, I think as everyone knows, well, there's two sides of the coin. Either salespeople are very lazy or salespeople are very busy. And I think it depends on who you talk to. But the results of both of those are the same, which means that getting the salespeople's attention and getting them to adopt a new tool can be a challenge. And what we found is that if you identify someone within the organization, and I think even Challenger refers to them as a mobilizer, we call them a sales mobilizer, whose role is to champion and actually help salespeople communicate value, is one part of that. The second part of that is to capture the results. I think the great majority of cases that we see where salespeople present a value proposition and you have a handful of experiences, a handful of examples, you almost always will get good feedback, and in some cases you get great feedback. And capturing that in a small success story and advertising that to the larger sales force is a way to get that momentum going, because ultimately salespeople want to make their life easier and they want to close more business and they want to help their clients and prospects. So if they feel like their colleagues are doing something that is making things easier and making them more successful, they'll jump on board. And so getting there with a mobilizer and with success stories appears to be the way to go.
Great, thanks. And we actually just had one last minute question come in. Can you share the value proposition with the client and give them the hand to further modify or circulate it within the organization? And if yes, is it okay to keep monitoring that evolution of the value proposition within the client organization transparently or confidentially?
Yeah, so you have the ability to share it with your client, and when you own a value proposition that you share with someone, then you certainly have the ability to see how that evolves. And that really gets down to the question of, do you want to give your client the ability to start changing all the numbers, and do you have confidence that they're not going to make the value proposition worse on you by accident? So that's really more around, how much flexibility do you want versus, hey, let's do this together and let's walk down this road hand in hand versus, let me know when you're done and we'll see what happened after the fact. So we have that capability, yes, and really the discussion is around how much flexibility you want to give.
Great, and that looks to be it for questions today. So that should be it from us, and we thank you all for taking the time to join us. A special thank you to Brian for his insights, and from all of us here at Leverage Point, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and take care. Thanks.
Thank you.